13 times the heavy rifle cracked. 13 times the spotter called a miss. The crosswind up here doesn't respect unit patches, and it certainly doesn't respect bravado. While the world's most elite shooters cursed the impossible 4,000-meter mark, a quiet woman in the back just wanted the noise to stop. The brass casing ejected with a metallic clatter, spinning through the thin mountain air before landing on the canvas tarp. It was the 13th shell. It joined 12 others, all cooling in the dirt, all representing failure. At this altitude, the air tasted like pennies and ozone. The high desert of the Nevada ranges was a jagged, wind-scoured bowl of nothing, baking under a white-hot sun, while the ambient temperature hovered just above freezing. It was the place designed to make human beings feel small. Splash, low and left, 3 mils, the spotter, a ranger named Cole, rasped. His voice was shredded from shouting over the relentless howl of the canyon wind. He rubbed a gloved hand over his bloodshot eyes, leaving a streak of grease across his cheek. You fell into the downdraft at the 2-mile mark, Hayes. Hayes, a Marine Scout sniper with a jawline like a cinder block and a temper to match, slammed his fist into the dirt beside his shooting mat. The thud was swallowed instantly by the vastness of the gorge. There is no downdraft at the 2-mile mark, Hayes snapped, his breathing heavy, ragged. The Kestrel says it's a direct crosswind, 8 miles an hour. It's the ammunition. The ballistic coefficient is garbage. It's not the ammo, a British SAS operator named Briggs muttered from the peanut gallery of elite shooters huddled behind the firing line. Briggs was shivering, despite his heavy parka. You're overcorrecting for the spindrift, but frankly, mate, this whole exercise is a bloody joke. They were trying to hit a 36-inch steel plate set against a limestone cliff exactly 4,000 meters away. 2.48 miles. At that distance, the target wasn't a shape. It was a pixel of grey against a sea of brown, barely visible even through glass that cost more than a luxury sedan. To make the shot, the bullet had to stay airborne for nearly 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, it would cross 3 distinct ravines, each with its own microclimate, thermal updrafts, and chaotic air currents. The rotation of the Earth itself, the Coriolis effect, had to be factored in. If a cloud passed over the sun in the middle of the valley, the sudden drop in temperature would shift the air density enough to push the bullet 5 feet off course. It was an impossible shot, dreamt up by Pentagon brass looking to test a new custom POM416 platform. They had brought in 13 of the best trigger pullers from across NATO. 13 alpha males swimming in adrenaline, caffeine and ego. And Cora. Cora Reynolds sat cross-legged 20 feet behind the firing line, leaning back against the rusted, bullet-pocked frame of a derelict Humvee. She wasn't looking at the target. She was looking at the dust. She had been a Navy SEAL for 5 years, having quietly survived the grueling integration process, not by being the loudest, but by being the most enduring. She didn't look like a recruitment poster. Her face was weathered, the skin around her eyes deeply lined from years of squinting into desert suns and sea spray. Her lips were cracked, bleeding slightly in the corner. Her hair, chopped short and uneven, was plastered to her forehead with cold sweat. Right now, her back ached with a dull, throbbing intensity, a souvenir from a bad fast rope insertion in Yemen 3 years ago. Her right knee felt like it was filled with ground glass. She wasn't feeling patriotic. She wasn't feeling the competitive fire that was currently eating Hayes and Briggs alive. She was just deeply, profoundly irritated. The bickering at the firing line spiked in volume. Hayes was arguing with the armorer about the rifle's headspace. Briggs was tapping furiously on a ballistic calculator strapped to his wrist, muttering about barometric pressure. Cora closed her eyes. The noise was giving her a migraine. To her, Shooting at this distance wasn't about math. Or rather, it wasn't just about math. Math was rigid. It assumed the world behaved rationally. But the air moving through this gorge was alive. It was messy. She could hear it whistling through the scrub brush near the firing line, a high, sharp pitch. But underneath that, if she listened closely, she could hear a deeper, hollower roar echoing from the second ravine a mile out. She opened her eyes and watched a clump of dry sagebrush detach from its roots and tumble across the mid-ground. It rolled left, then violently snapped right, caught in a thermal shear that none of the expensive sensors at the firing line were picking up. "They're reading the air where we are," Cora thought, chewing on a piece of dried beef jerky that tasted faintly of CLP gun oil. "They aren't reading the air where the bullet is going to be." "Next shooter," Colonel Davis announced. The commander was bundled in a heavy Gore-Tex jacket, looking thoroughly miserable. "Briggs, you're up. Let's get this over with. If nobody pings the steel by 1400 hours, we're calling it. The target is unhittable in these conditions." "Right then," Briggs said, stepping up to the mat. He didn't look confident. He looked resigned. Cora sighed, a slow release of breath that barely disturbed the dust in front of her. She massaged her temples. She knew exactly what Briggs was going to do. He was going to trust the digital readout on his wrist. He was going to ignore the fact that the temperature in the valley was dropping as the sun dipped behind the western ridge. She watched him settle in behind the massive rifle. The smell of burnt powder and anxious sweat drifted back to her. She hated that smell. It smelled like failure. Briggs took 3 full minutes to set up. He dialed his scope elevation with precise, sharp clicks. He checked the bubble level on his scope. He asked Cole for 3 separate wind reads. The atmosphere around the firing line was thick, heavy with the collective exhaustion of men who were used to being infallible, suddenly faced with their own limitations. "Send it," Cole finally muttered, eye pressed to his spotting scope. Crack! The concussive shockwave kicked up a cloud of fine, talcum-like dust around the muzzle brake. The sound rolled out over the gorge, a thunderclap looking for a place to die. Cora didn't watch the target. She watched the heavy mirage floating over the second ravine. She counted in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4. She saw the exact moment the bullet hit the cold air pocket in the middle of the valley. The mirage rippled, a violent shudder in the visual distortion. The bullet was going to drop. Fast. 8, 9, 10. "Splash," Cole said. His voice was flat. "Short. Way short. You hit the dirt 50 yards beneath the plate. The round just fell out of the sky." Briggs cursed softly, rolling off the rifle. He didn't yell like Hayes. He just looked defeated. The density altitude shifted, he explained to nobody in particular, wiping the grit from his mouth. The air just got thick. Colonel Davis checked his watch. He looked out at the vast expanse of nothing, the grey speck of the target totally lost in the afternoon haze. He rubbed the back of his neck. "All right," Davis said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "That's 13. The platform is capable, but the environment is out of parameters. We can't get a reliable firing solution. Pack up the gear. We'll try again tomorrow at dawn before the thermals wake up." The collective sigh of relief from the men was palpable. Nobody wanted to be the 14th guy to miss. The armourers started moving forward to clear the weapon and bag it. "Wait!" The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't commanding. It was a raspy, gravelly sound, rough from disuse and dehydration. Every head turned. Cora pushed herself off the rusted Humvee bumper. Her joints popped, a sharp, audible crack in the sudden silence. She slung her battered canvas pack over one shoulder and walked slowly toward the firing line. Her boots crunched heavily in the gravel. She didn't swagger. She limped slightly, favoring her bad knee. "Reynolds?" Colonel Davis frowned. "We're calling it. The wind is completely fractured out there." "Let me handle that," Cora said. She didn't wait for permission. She walked past Hayes, who was staring at her with a mix of incredulity and irritation, and stopped at the shooting mat. "You're kidding, right?" Hayes scoffed, crossing his arms. "The Brit just dumped around 50 yards short. The Kestrel is reading a total cluster. What are you going to do, eyeball it?" Cora ignored him. She dropped her pack onto the dirt. The physical reality of the moment was settling into her bones. Her fingers were stiff from the creeping cold. She peeled off her tactical gloves, stuffing them into her cargo pocket. She needed skin-on-steel contact. She needed to feel the rifle, not just hold it. She knelt on the mat and slid in behind the massive .416 platform. It smelled like hot coal and carbon. The cheek rest was slick with the sweat of the men who had failed before her. She wiped it down with the sleeve of her jacket. "You don't have a spotter, Reynolds," Cole pointed out, though he didn't move from his glass. "I don't need one," Cora replied quietly. "You're reading the wind wrong anyway." A murmur of bruised egos rippled through the group behind her. "Excuse me?" Cole bristled. Cora finally looked through the scope. The glass was immaculate, bright and clear. The crosshairs rested in the center of the grey speck 2.5 miles away. But Cora wasn't looking at the crosshairs. She was looking at the air between the muzzle and the steel. "You're using the Kestrel to measure the crosswind," Cora said, her voice dropping into a low, detached murmur. She wasn't trying to teach them. She was just talking herself through the geometry. "You're seeing an 8-mile-an-hour wind from the left, but look at the dust devil at the 1,200-meter mark. It's leaning right. There's a geographical funnel down in that first canyon. The wind isn't pushing left to right. It's swirling off the limestone and pulling backward. It's a headwind disguised as a crosswind." Silence fell over the firing line. Even Hayes stopped chewing his gum. Cora reached up to the elevation turret on the scope. She didn't look at the ballistic calculator Briggs had left on the mat. She let her mind sink into the environment. She felt the chill on the left side of her neck. She smelled the incoming weather system, a faint scent of rain and crushed juniper berries blowing in from the north. Click, click, click. She dialed the elevation up. She was adding more drop compensation than any mathematical model would suggest. "You're dialing too high," Briggs warned softly. "You'll send it over the mountain." "The air in the second ravine is cold," Cora murmured, settling her cheek against the stock. The metal bit into her skin. "Cold air is thick. It's going to grab the bullet and pull it down. I need to throw the round in a high arc, let it fall through the thermal, not fight it." She adjusted the windage. She dialed left, into the wind, but not as much as Hayes had. She closed her eyes for a second. The headache was still there, throbbing in time with her pulse. She focused on her breathing. She didn't try to slow her heart rate to some zen-like crawl. That was a myth for the movies. Her heart was beating hard, pumping oxygen. She just needed to time the shot between the beats. She opened her eyes. The world narrowed to a circle of glass. She ignored the shouting of the wind. She ignored the 13 men watching her back. She waited. She wasn't looking for the wind to stop. The wind never stops. She was looking for it to harmonize. She watched a single hawk circling high above the second ravine. The bird banked, suddenly dropping a dozen feet as it hit a downdraft, before catching a thermal and rising again. There. The air was settling into a rhythm. Cora's finger slid inside the trigger guard. The steel of the trigger was freezing against her bare skin. She applied pressure. 2 pounds, 3. She didn't pull the trigger. She let the rifle surprise her. The Black Hawk didn't land. It hovered 3 feet above a jagged spine of shale. the rotors beating the thin mountain air into a deafening, cyclical roar. The smell of unburned JP-8 aviation fuel coated the back of Emily's throat, thick and metallic. "Go!" the crew chief screamed, holding up a single gloved finger. Emily threw her rifle drag bag out the open door and stepped off the skid. Her boots hit the loose rock, and she immediately dropped to one knee to avoid being blown backward into the abyss. Behind her, Owen, a deeply cynical, chain-smoking Marine sniper who Hayes had pulled from his bunk 10 minutes ago, hit the dirt with a heavy grunt. The helicopter pitched its nose down and fell away into the valley, the sound of its engines fading almost instantly, swallowed by the vast, empty throat of the canyon. Then came the wind. It was cold, carrying the sharp scent of crushed sage and ancient dust, slicing through Emily's sweat-soaked shirt. 400 meters up, Owen shouted over the howling crosswind, pointing toward a jagged outcrop of black basalt that looked like a broken tooth against the darkening sky. "Better get moving before the light completely dies, Chief." Emily didn't answer. She just grabbed the drag bag's heavy canvas strap, gritted her teeth, and started climbing. The ascent was brutal. There was no path, just loose scree that shifted under their boots, threatening to send them tumbling 1,000 feet down into the canyon. Emily's bad back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic heat. Every time she pushed off her right leg, a spike of pain shot up her sciatic nerve, radiating into her ribcage. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She focused entirely on the physical mechanics of breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, keeping her heart rate from spiking into the red zone. She wasn't driven by adrenaline. Adrenaline was cheap. It burned fast and left your hands shaking. She was driven by the cold, mechanical necessity of the job. Marines were dying in the dirt below, and she was the only piece of machinery in this theater capable of stopping it. It took them 22 minutes to reach the precipice. By the time Emily collapsed behind a low parapet of rock, her lungs were burning, tasting of copper and dust. The sun had dipped below the western peaks, painting the canyon in bruised shades of purple and charcoal. "Here," Owen rasped, dumping his pack and pulling out a rolled-up foam shooting mat. He laid it flat on a narrow shelf of stone overlooking the canyon. Emily unzipped her bag. She pulled out the MK-13, the metal cold against her calloused hands. She snapped the Harris bipod legs down, resting them on the mat, and settled in behind the scope. She pressed her cheek against the stock, finding the familiar, comforting geometry of the weapon. "Talk to me, Owen," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, stripped bare by the climb. Owen lay on her right, peering through a massive loopholed spotting scope. He pulled a Kestrel weather meter from his vest and held it up into the fading light. "Range is exactly 1450 to the cave mouth," Owen said, his voice flat, professional, stripped of all its usual sarcasm. "Elevation is a wash. We're perfectly level with them. But the wind... Jesus." Emily looked through her Schmidt and Binder optic. At 25x magnification, the canyon wall on the other side leaped into blurry focus. She dialed her parallax knob, smoothing the image out until the jagged rocks sharpened. She could see the dark, irregular hole of the cave where the enemy had set up. Below it on the canyon floor, she saw the faint, desperate flashes of M4 carbines from the pinned-down Marine element. "I'm seeing mirage shifting left to right at the muzzle," Emily murmured, watching the heat waves bleed off the sun-baked rocks just ahead of her barrel. "Right to left in the valley," Owen corrected, looking at the dust being kicked up below. "And at the target, it's swirling, bouncing off the canyon walls. Call it an 8-knot full value from the left at your muzzle, a 12-knot half value from the right in the gut, and God knows what at the cave." Emily adjusted her breathing, forcing her muscles to go completely slack. The pain in her back faded to a dull hum, compartmentalized and ignored. She was no longer a tired woman in her 30s with failing joints. She was a biological extension of the rifle. "Do the math," Emily said. "You need a 14.5 mil holdover for elevation," Owen said, tapping numbers into his ballistic calculator. "Bullet drop is massive at this range. Flight time is going to be almost 2.6 seconds. For the wind, give me a left hold of 2.2 mils. Emily turned her elevation turret. It clicked with sharp, tactile snaps. 1, 2, 3, up to 14.5. She didn't touch the windage knob. She would hold for the wind using the mil dots in her reticle. Down in the valley, the heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a DSHK 12.7mm machine gun echoed off the walls. Through her scope, Emily saw the massive muzzle flashes erupting from the blackness of the cave, spitting basketball-sized fireballs into the twilight. The enemy gunner was chewing the marine positions to pieces. "Target acquired," Emily said, her voice hollow. "I see the muzzle flash. Can't see the shooter. He's deep in the shadows. Wait for him to change belts," Owen said, his eye pressed hard against the spotting scope. "He'll have to step forward to clear the feed tray. When the muzzle flash stops, you'll have maybe a 3-second window." "Understood." The canyon grew darker. The wind howled, a lonely, high-pitched scream cutting through the rock formations. Emily's right eye was locked open, staring through the glass. Her left eye remained open, taking in the peripheral light. Her finger rested against the trigger guard. She felt a drop of sweat roll down her temple, cutting a clean line through the dirt on her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She didn't blink. The heavy machine gun fired a long, sustained burst. Tracer rounds, glowing angry green, poured down into the dry riverbed. Then it stopped. "He's out," Owen hissed. "Watch the shadow." Inside the pitch-black cave, a faint metallic clatter echoed as the enemy gunner threw open the feed cover of the DSHK. For a fraction of a second, the silhouette of a man stepped forward into the ambient light of the cave entrance, holding a fresh belt of ammunition. "I have him," Emily breathed. "Wind is spiking," Owen warned sharply. "Hold left 2.5. Emily shifted the rifle a fraction of a millimeter. The crosshairs floated just to the left of the shadow's torso. At 450 meters, the target was incredibly small. A tiny, insignificant speck in the vast optic. 2.6 seconds of flight time, she thought. If he moves after I pull the trigger, I miss. She began her breathing cycle. Inhale, exhale halfway. Pause, the natural respiratory pause. That brief, suspended moment between breaths where the body stops vibrating, where the heart seems to hang between beats. Emily's finger slid off the guard and found the curve of the trigger. It was set to a crisp 2 pounds. She didn't yank it. She didn't command the weapon to fire. She just steadily applied pressure, adding an ounce at a time, letting the break surprise her. Crack, the unsuppressed MK-13 roared. The recoil was a violent physical shove, driving the heavy buttstock back into her bruised collarbone. Muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of dust around the foam mat, momentarily obscuring her vision. Emily didn't flinch. She fought the recoil, muscling the rifle back down, driving her eye back into the scope to watch the trace. Through the optics, a faint, swirling distortion, the vapor trail of the massive .300 Winchester Magnum bullet, arced high into the sky, tearing through the cold air. "Tracking," Owen muttered, his voice tight. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bullet dropped toward the cave mouth, fighting the thermals. "Impact," Owen said. In the scope, the shadowy figure jerked violently backward, collapsing into the darkness of the cave before the sound of the gunshot even reached the valley floor. The heavy machine gun remained silent. "Got him," Owen said, exhaling a long plume of grey breath. Center mass. Jesus, what a poke! Emily didn't celebrate. She didn't feel a rush of triumph. She smoothly ran the bolt, catching the smoking brass casing before it hit the dirt, and fed a fresh round into the chamber. "Watch for the spotter," she said, her eye never leaving the glass. 10 seconds passed. A second figure scrambled out of the darkness, lunging toward the machine gun, desperate to get the weapon back into the fight. "Target 2, same wind," Owen called. Emily didn't hesitate. She found her hold, paused her breath, and let the trigger break. The rifle bucked. The copper-jacketed bullet ripped across the canyon. 2.6 seconds later, the second figure folded in half and crumpled over the weapon's tripod. "Target down," Owen confirmed. He pulled away from the spotting scope and keyed his radio. "Command, this is Overwatch. Enemy heavy guns are neutralized. Tell the Marines they have a window." The radio crackled. A frantic, exhausted voice broke through the static. "Copy, Overwatch. Moving now. God bless you guys." Emily clicked the safety on. She slowly sat up, breaking her cheek weld. The cold wind immediately bit into the sweat on her face. Her back was screaming now, a sharp, stabbing agony that made her vision swim. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cold aluminum chassis of the rifle, and just breathed. "Good shooting, Chief," Owen said softly, packing up his kestrel. "Let's go home," Emily whispered. 4 hours later, the Chinook transport landed back at the forward operating base. It was past Euro 200. The camp was quiet, lit only by the amber glow of the perimeter sodium lights and the harsh fluorescent strip inside the Tactical Operations Center. Emily walked down the rear ramp of the helicopter. She was coated in a new layer of white dust. Her muscles felt like they had been beaten with hammers. She carried her heavy rifle case by the handle, letting it drag slightly in the dirt because she simply didn't have the strength to lift it clear. She walked toward the barracks tents, wanting nothing more than to strip off her boots and collapse onto a cot. Near the entrance to the chow hall, a group of men were standing around a burn barrel, smoking. Army Rangers, Task Force Viper. Emily saw Bennett standing in the center. He had a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand. When he saw her walking out of the shadows, dragging the heavy Pelican case, the conversation died instantly. The other Rangers, Davis and Walsh, turned to look at her. There were no smirks this time, no jokes about coffee or analysts. Bennett took a step forward. He looked at her dirt-caked face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the sheer physical toll radiating from her posture. He opened his mouth, searching for the right words. An apology, a concession, an acknowledgement of the impossible math she had just performed to save 30 Marines in the dark. "Hey," Bennett started, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Listen, about earlier. We just heard what happened in the Korengal. The Marines made it out. I just wanted to say..." Emily didn't stop walking. She didn't look at him. She didn't break her stride. "Armorer's tent is closed," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper as she passed him. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his respect. She didn't care what they thought of her. She only cared about the 450 meters, the wind and the math. Everything else was just noise in the valley. She pushed open the flap of her tent, dropped the rifle case beside her cot, and finally, mercifully, went to sleep. If you loved this story, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm to keep serving you gritty, grounded content just like this. Know someone who appreciates raw, tactical storytelling. Share this video with them right now. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. We're dropping intense, new stories every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay sharp and stay tuned.